Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are going to unpack a profound visual mystery that is literally hanging on the walls of millions of homes right now. We're going to look at the very foundation of how an entire nation visualizes the divine. It's an amazing story about art, history, social revolution, and a legacy that quietly shaped modern media. I am incredibly excited to guide you through this, so let's get right to it.
Okay, let's dive into this. Close your eyes for just a second. If you picture revered deities like Sri Ram or Sri Krishna, a very specific, almost universally recognized image probably pops into your head. Now, for decades, lots of folks have just assumed that the iconic television directors of the 1980s, like Raman and Sagar, were the ones who created and solidified this modern visual standard. And honestly, that makes sense, right? TV has a massive reach. But what if I told you that the true architect of these iconic faces wasn't a television director at all?
The real pioneer behind the modern imagery of India's gods is actually a 19th century prince from Kerala named Raja Ravi Varma. Now, you might not know his name off the top of your head, but I guarantee you know his work. His art completely redefined and forever changed the relationship between the people and the divine. He didn't have television, he didn't have the internet. He had a canvas, and with that canvas, he executed a quiet revolution.
To understand exactly how he achieved this, we need to look at his technique. This brings us to Section 1, the new grammar of art.
Take a look at the stark contrast between these styles. Before Varma, Indian classical art depicted divine figures in a very stylized, almost abstract way. Faces were painted almost like masks, and torsos were deliberately elongated so the figures looked supernatural, completely separate from ordinary human beings. But Varma comes along and completely shatters that tradition. He was the first major artist to give these divine forms a distinctly human face. He basically brought the gods down from the abstract heavens and gave them relatable, realistic human features.
So, how did he manage this unprecedented realism? Well, it actually started when he was just 13 years old. Varma carefully observed a visiting Dutch painter named Theodor Jensen. Just by watching him, this young prince figured out how to manipulate oil paints, which, by the way, was a medium that wasn't really used in Indian classical art at the time. He learned the exact techniques needed to render human skin so it looks soft and real, and how to paint fabrics so you could almost feel the texture of the folds. He wasn't just adopting a new style, he was entirely rewriting the grammar of Indian art.
His famous painting of the goddess Saraswati brilliantly illustrates this method. He didn't just invent these visuals out of thin air. He was deeply rooted in tradition. For this specific depiction, he meticulously studied the 50th chapter of the Agni Purana, an ancient scriptural text. He took those intricate written descriptions from antiquity and translated them into a breathtakingly realistic oil-painted form. So he wasn't abandoning tradition at all. He was giving it a completely new physical form, perfectly combining ancient scriptural accuracy with modern European realism.
But realism alone wasn't enough to unite a country as incredibly diverse as India. Let's move to Section 2, an Indian identity, a universal prototype.
Varma realized that to create imagery that resonated everywhere, he needed to blend regional elements. Notice how he constructed this visual prototype step by step. First, he used a distinctly North Indian skin tone and facial structure. Then, he draped his female deities in the traditional Maharashtrian Nowvari sari. And finally, he adorned them with heavy, intricate South Indian jewelry. It was a highly calculated, absolute genius of an artistic formula.
The crucial point here is that this wasn't just some aesthetic choice. It was a unifying cultural strategy. By combining elements from the North, West, and South, Varma created a generic Indian prototype. No matter which region of India you were from, you could look at his paintings and see something of your own local culture reflected right back at you. He made the divine universally relatable across a massively diverse subcontinent.
Having perfected that visual grammar, Varma was ready to change society itself. This is Section 3, God in Every Home, the Printing Revolution.
This next step is arguably his greatest achievement. He established a printing press to produce what are known as oleographs. These were basically extremely affordable, mass-produced prints that were designed to perfectly resemble high-quality oil paintings. Suddenly, his magnificent, realistic art wasn't just locked away in royal palaces or wealthy estates anymore. It could be printed by the thousands.
And this leads us to a profound social revolution. During that era, certain marginalized communities were strictly barred from entering temples. They were literally denied physical access to the divine. But Varma's oleographs bypassed those rigid social barriers completely. Because these prints were so affordable, marginalized groups could simply buy them. For the very first time, they had the power to bring the gods directly into their own homes. It democratized devotion in a way that had literally never been seen before.
Now, as with any massive cultural shift, there were differing perspectives. On one hand, you had the undeniable reality of popular adoption. Because of Varma's mass printing, the whole nation began to recognize the exact same unified visual of deities, like Rama and Krishna. It was true mass cultural unification. But on the other hand, you had this fierce 20th century critique from the Bengal school of art, most notably led by Abanindranath Tagore. Tagore heavily criticized Varma's work, arguing that the European oil techniques made the art feel foreign and materialistic, and that it lacked the traditional spiritual abstraction of true Indian art. So our sources clearly present both sides, massive popular embrace versus very strict artistic critique from traditionalists.
Regardless of the critiques, though, the momentum of Varma's visuals was totally unstoppable. Let's look at Section 4, Modern Legacy, Cinema, and Beyond.
We can trace this incredible visual lineage like a domino effect. It starts with Varma's printing press. An aspiring young man named Dadasaheb Phalke actually worked at this very press, completely surrounded by Varma's vibrant, realistic imagery. Phalke would later go on to direct Raja Harishchandra and is today known as the father of Indian cinema. The visual language Phalke absorbed at that press directly influenced the aesthetic of India's first moving pictures. And that visual lineage continues straight into the present day. When you watch a local Ram Leela, when you see those famous 1980s TV shows, or even when you just look at the calendars hanging in your kitchen, you are looking at the direct descendants of Varma's original oil paintings.
Which leaves us with this final thought. We interact with these images so often that we just take them for granted as timeless artifacts. But the next time you look at a calendar or a poster of a deity in your home, I want you to ask yourself, are you merely looking at ancient, unchangeable tradition? Or are you witnessing the ongoing, quiet revolution of a 19th century prince who decided to give the divine a human face? It really makes you see your everyday surroundings in a whole new light, doesn't it? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll see you in the next one.